everybody, and welcome to my talk, Opening Up the Hydrogen Supply Chain Through Assurance. So my name is Leanne Halliday. I'm LRQA's Territory Manager for Oceania. So as you can tell by the accent, I'm from Australia. I live in Australia, I'm not from Australia. And I'm also the Global Hydrogen Subject Matter Expert for LRQA. LRQA is a global assurance provider, providing certification and inspection services across the whole risk sphere, from supply chain right the way through to operation. Today we're going to be looking at the market outlook. So what we're seeing as could be a potential bottleneck in the supply chain, what are the risks in the supply chain, and how, from both a manufacturing and a procurement point of view, through applying assurance techniques, we can help to make sure that the supply chain does not become a bottleneck and help to make these hydrogen projects a reality. I've also got a slide on some case studies where we've applied some of these assurance techniques at the end of the presentation. So I won't dwell on this. I'm sure these numbers have been bandied around all the time, but there is still a commitment to hydrogen as part of the energy transition. And whether we're saying $6.8 trillion, $1 trillion, it doesn't matter. It's a big amount of money that is committed between now and 2050 to make hydrogen a reality, with at least 58 countries publishing hydrogen strategies. Now let's talk about hype to reality. So there is still a lot of hype in the market. If I look at the data from the IEE database, and we just looked at the raw data between the projects that are in the pipeline between now and 2040, we're looking at 1,800 projects. Now let's put some reality on it and look at the ones in the next 5 years that are greater than 10 megawatts. So the ones that are actually going to make a difference to the energy transition. And we drop down to around 69 projects. So they're the projects within our sphere, but also the ones that actually have FID. That seems a big drop from 1,800 down to 69. But if you're looking even at 69 projects globally, greater than 10 megawatts in the next 5 years, that's still a lot of projects. What we're actually seeing, if we look at the data as well, is around 30% of projects announced will actually go through to FID. So if we're looking at it for the next 5 years and 10 years, that's a good rule of thumb to put in. And you'll also see where these projects are. What was interesting when I ran the data back in December was we did see a big increase in the number of projects in India, and I think we see that from the delegation here today, and also in North Asia. It was interesting to see what we saw in America. So we saw a lot of projects get announced, but not many go to FID, as the rules around IRA still are not quite clear. So what does this have to do with what my talk today about opening up the supply chain through assurance? Well, like I said, the supply chain needs to grow, and the supply chain needs to grow rapidly. So here's just some statistics which give you an idea. So the hydrogen compressor market is looking at doubling in the next 10 years. The hydrogen pressure vessel market in the gas reinforcement vessel space looks at a 20% year-on-year growth. And then we get to electrolyzers, right, which won't surprise anybody. Today, the current capacity, and this is also a little bit, could be 2025, is around 20 gigawatts. That's predicted to be greater than 100 gigawatts per year. And I'm sure walking around the fair today, you can see lots of new supplies of manufacturers of electrolyzers and people innovating in the electrolyzer space to make them a lot more easily produced and vastly produced. And also, the manufacturers aren't necessarily where the projects are. So we've also got a logistics issue and a localization issue of a lot of the equipment as we move forward. And this is all on top of a growth in other sectors, a growth in the oil and gas sectors in some areas, and also a growth for when we're looking at wind turbines, pumps, solar farms to all go with the growth in the energy transition sector. So let's look at it first from a manufacturer's point of view. So what are we seeing? Well, we're seeing existing suppliers exporting to new markets. So exporting to new geographical markets, but also you might see a lot of oil and gas and power companies now moving into the hydrogen space. Suppliers diversifying. A lot of suppliers who would necessarily not produce electrolyzer in the past. We see L&T in India, for example, Cummins or Accelerator now producing electrolyzers. We see new entrants to the market, new technology. Electrolyzers, hydrogen technology has been around for years. However, there is a lot of innovations needed to make it scalable and to bring the costs down. And all of this in an evolving and immature standards and regulation market. Yes, that has moved on in the last 12 months, but in many jurisdictions around the world, it is evolving slower than the projects are evolving. So what could all this mean? Well, it means additional extra costs, and particularly when you're bidding a job, and all these costs are add-ons that you don't necessarily see at the start of a project. We see people entering the market with limited experience or limited reference lists in hydrogen, and therefore find it very hard to get a foothold in the hydrogen market, even though their technology might be completely suitable and has been used in other sectors, when they find it difficult to get onto procurement lists because they're not necessarily able to show their experience. So what are we doing as an independent third-party assurance provider? Well, a lot of the time, at this time of the market and the maturity of the market, we're actually flipping our normal services a little bit on the head, taking our technical expertise and our knowledge of regulations and standards globally, and helping our manufacturers, EPCs and operators to really just enter the market at a known regulatory and quality risk. So around this wheel, I've got some examples that I've given you of how we're supporting manufacturers to make sure that they're not a bottleneck in the process to getting these projects to market. The first one is a process called Approval in Principle, or AIP. This is where we look at a technology, we look at its high-level risks, the standards that are applied, and high-level design reviews, and we can issue as an independent third party a certificate to say that piece of equipment is approved in principle to be used in the hydrogen sector under certain boundaries and conditions. This is great when we've got new innovations going to market and really helps people to get a hold in the market and get their first experiences. We're also doing a lot of standards road mapping, and this is probably the biggest question we've had to our stand this week, is how do we understand the regulations that apply in certain geographies and for certain types of equipment? So for example, if somebody's entering a certain area in Africa, for example, we will be able to list all of the certain standards and regulations that apply for that project or that piece of equipment going into that market, from both electrical, mechanical, health and safety, etc. If the standards aren't available, then we supplement them with best practice from global in the roadmap, so that they've got a full roadmap to take their projects or their equipment to market, knowing that we've got the full costs laid out. Usually, as an inspection company, we work on ITPs and work towards ITPs to make sure that's something compliant. A lot of the time now, we're flipping that on the head and actually helping develop the ITPs to make sure that they are consistent with the various standards and regulations. Another interesting one is ISO 22734, which is the electrolyzer standard. It's not a certifiable standard, but as the industry builds trust, we are being asked more and more to provide certification against this standard, and we've developed a verification scheme, including design review and inspection, where we can give a certificate to build trust with somebody buying the electrolyzer or somebody taking the electrolyzer to market. And also, we're being asked quite a bit to do non-regulation design reviews. We've also always done design reviews where they're needed from a regulatory perspective, so whether that's for different WorkSafe needs in Australia or for PED and ASME, whereas now people who are trying to get their products to market are asking us to do independent design reviews to various standards just to build trust with their customers. So now let's look at the other end. So we've talked about manufacturers selling into the market. Now let's look at the operators or EPCs actually buying. And what we're seeing here is they're needing to build trust in a new market. If you've worked in oil and gas or power for years, you know where to go to for valves, you know where to go for good valves or cheap valves, you know where to go to for your pressure equipment. Now they're entering a whole new field with a lot of new entrants. So we need to build trust. We've also got that regulation piece, but we've also got some new and emerging risks in the market as well, particularly when people are buying equipment from new locations, but also, for example, electrolyzers with rare earths in them. We need to make sure that we're sourcing responsible. We need to make sure that we're taking into account human rights and modern slavery aspects when we're purchasing new materials or from a new market. And we also need to make sure that we're managing our Scope 3 emissions and understand from an environmental point of view, where we're going to get the best from a transportation. We talked about logistics, but also from how the supply chain is managing their emissions. So there's a lot more complex things to think about when you're from an EPC or a procurement department of an operator rather than a manufacturer. So what do we do there? Well, what we're finding is, from an assurance point of view, we're really taking what we would usually do at the back end, so once you've purchased something, the inspection side, and moving it up front. So a lot more time and effort is being spent in the vendor assessment space. So before you actually place the order, making sure that you're selecting the right vendor. And from that, we're actually doing tailored ITPs, so developing them ITPs again, to make sure that you can focus your efforts where the key risks are, rather than just doing your standard ITPs. From a responsible sourcing point of view, one of the biggest growing businesses within LRQA is social auditing audits, so ERSA auditors, and also access to databases where you can check the risks or red flags of different areas before you actually place your orders. Greenhouse gas verification, certificate of origin. I could talk all day about certificate of origin. For me, this is one of the biggest barriers to the hydrogen sector at the moment, or the able to export and import hydrogen, and that's something we need to look at from a global perspective. And also technical due diligence. But looking at technical due diligence from a different way. Hydrogen projects are not only about return on investment, but it's also about return on investment to our planet. And we need to work with all of the stakeholders to make sure they understand that and make sure this is built into our technical and commercial due diligence. So let's look at some case studies and what we've done around the world to really implement this. So we've got a real good case study there where we did approval in principle for a company in Germany, Ambertech. They had an innovative water storage prototype that they've developed, and we were able to look at that from a risk perspective, a standards application perspective, and approve that in principle. We're now moving at them to their next level of innovations, and we've got a set of guidance notes available so you can understand what is the process that you need to go through for AIP and then eventually technology qualification. I talked about road mapping. We've developed a road mapping tool where you can click on any country in the world and it will list all of the regulations associated with that country, whether it's from a project delivery or a manufacturing import or export perspective. And that also looks at what it means for different megawatts of plants as well. So that's something that we've developed for different customers and is available to the market. The last case study that I'll give you there is a company, again, a German company called Ameco, who had developed a glass reinforced pressure vessel to take to market. They wanted to put that into the EU and they also wanted to put that into the America. The PED and ASME applications at the time didn't go into depth for this sort of application. So what we did is we took our technical expertise and knowledge of the regulations, went back to first principles, and were able to certify this to PED and ASME, and now it's exported throughout the world. So that's the end of my presentation. Just to give you an idea of LRQA, we are a global company. We have offices all over the globe and inspectors, surveyors and consultants. And we've worked on greater than 600 projects renewables projects in the last 18 months. So if you've got any questions or would like to explore any of them concepts further with us, we're just literally 2 stands behind here. So come and speak to me and members of my team at stand C126, and we'd be happy to discuss any of these concepts or answer any questions further. Thank you very much. I think I've run out of time for questions, right? Okay. If you come to our stand, then I'd be more than willing to take questions there. Thank you.